If you want to make your own podcast but feel intimidated by the tech barriers, then you might need Alitu. Alitu is a web app that lets you create and publish great sounding podcast episodes. It takes care of the complicated stuff, leaving you free to concentrate on what you do best, talking about your passion. Alitu, the podcast maker app, find it at alitu.com. That's ALITU.com.
Hey everybody, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast. My name is Josh Rapoon. I'm your host. Today we're going to do part 2 of our interview with Dr. Helen Turner, who's the Vice President for Strategy and Innovation at Chaminade University in Honolulu, Hawaii. So Dr. Turner, I'll call you Helen. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So in part 2, these questions, so originally the format, Helen, as you recall, was 10 questions with Helen Turner. And so this is part 2. And so these questions move away from your experience at Chaminade and mine a little bit of your thinking about college in general and about some other related subjects. So here's question number 7. A recent Forbes.com article cited a study that asked Americans what would be most helpful for a high school graduate to launch a career, and 60% of them chose an internship at Google versus 40% who chose a degree from Harvard. So the question is, there seems to be evidence that Americans are seeing more value in on-the-job experience than getting a college degree. So what are your thoughts about that? Why might that be the case? And what are you thinking about this?
I think it's really interesting. I'm not weeping any tears for Harvard, but
Right. They can come to Chaminade.
Yeah,
they'll get something very special.
I think. So first of all, absolutely the getting, real world experience and that sort of on the job training linking to quote what employers want that's an important and much overdue trend, I think, in higher education. The challenge I have with pushing students towards, let's say, more kind of vocational, more, on the job, in-house training programs, those kind of things, is I'm fine with that as long as it doesn't cap them out, right? If what happens is that the students who lack privilege, end up taking that route in droves, and you end up with a far more elitist higher education system because of it.
Right.
And it goes back to, I lived through when, Margaret Thatcher overturned education in England. And, what she did was she leveled the playing field between, polytechnic, more vocational kind of trade school type places and, universities. And, it's probably the only thing she ever did I agreed with, right?
Right.
In the sense that it became, it's about, democracy, and it's about earning potential, and it's about inclusion. So my take on it is, I think we have to ask who's getting the internships at Google for a start, right?
I do.
But also if we sort of replace the idea of a conventional higher education in a university setting with, just go and learn that in a company, I worry about that then being something that is not equally and fairly applied across all demographics and all levels of privilege. Now, higher ed has to move, though, right, in this,
Indeed.
right? So I've never particularly bought into the idea that, universities are kind of ivory towers with all this kind of dissociated, unconnected, disconnected sort of classes that aren't any value. I don't buy that. I think that, a liberal arts or a liberal arts based education, that's what generates the values and the purpose and the worldview to make you successful in whatever you want to do. And the specialization that you can do either in an R1 research university or a small college like Chaminade, all of that is really, good stuff. Where I feel that the universities need to move their needles is really around meeting that trend in the middle and saying, okay, how can we link with employers? How can we get students into workplaces as part of their university experience? Not just as the frosting, but how does that become part of the cake? I mean, I was very formed by the fact that the degree that I did many, many years ago in England was a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry. And it was 3 years on a university campus in York, which is very cold, and 1 year in industry, whole year, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I worked for Glaxo, the pharmaceutical company in London. First time in London, first time in a big lab. I blew up a £250,000 piece of equipment on my first day in the lab.
Wow.
And I learned, and I broke this news to my supervisor, and I learned in her moment of reaction what a true leader and mentor is. She's like, okay.
Right.
So I think, those kinds of experiences, yes, higher ed has to change and has to be more responsive to these kind of trends, but there is also, a real potential for a lot of damage to, long-term earnings potential and just the strength of citizenship and society if we throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so that concerns me a little bit, but overall, I'm very excited to see higher ed called on the carpet to be relevant and to give students these incredible, formative, exciting experiences where they're dealing with all of the personalities that you find in a workplace. And I feel that can only be good, right? Yeah.
I've read a number of articles and seen some research that suggests that one of the biggest disruptions that's coming is where businesses, firms actually take on sort of the business of higher education and weave it seamlessly as much as possible into the work experience. So I'm super interested in how that might play out and how higher education might respond to efforts by businesses to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for higher ed to embrace it and work with it and find ways of, adding value into those workplace settings. I think, I think higher education, it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? It is a set of classes that you take. It's a set of competencies that you gain. When I was first helping set up our nursing program at Chaminade, I didn't know much about nursing, but I was sort of helping do this. And there was a big trend towards what they call competency-based education in nursing. And then there was nursing, right? And it's greater than the sum of simply being able to stick a needle in an arm accurately 10 times or do this particular kind of run an IV pump correctly. I mean, all of that stuff's important, but it's not a checklist, the aggregate of which makes you a nurse, right? And so, I think that's the piece of it that I sort of struggle with. It's a bit like in data science. You can go online, you can go to Launch Code or Udemy and you can do a series of competencies. But is there a difference between that and doing something where you have faculty who are curating that for you, faculty who are engaging you in their research projects, faculty who are giving you permission to work on the thing that you're really interested in? Right. I have to feel there's a difference between those two things. But the workplace, education in the workplace, again, that's something that we really need to start thinking about in higher ed, how we're going to not fight that trend necessarily, stand, by our idea that it's not for everyone and it's not going to, replace higher education, but what can we do that can contribute value to it? Really interesting set of questions.
Right. Okay, question number 8, Helen. I was really looking forward to asking you this one. So over the past couple weeks, millions of Americans have watched primetime Jeopardy episodes, shows that are pitting the greatest of all winners on Jeopardy against each other. And so, hey, listeners, spoiler alert, if you've recorded these shows and still haven't watched it, too bad. I'm about to tell you how it ends. But Ken Jennings won convincingly over the other two very, very epic performers on Jeopardy. But the show failed to note that a few years ago, Jennings was crushed in a duel match with an artificial intelligence software. So my question is, in what ways should education and higher education be responding to AI?
Like, I'm just going to admit this, that my experience of Jeopardy is limited to the SNL sketches.
Right.
So I was following what you were saying with interest, thinking, oh, I hope he's not going to ask me something about Jeopardy. But the AI. The other great example, of course, that is recently, I think it was a Go player in Japan
There's
who
a great
said,
documentary film
I
called
give up,
AlphaGo.
because there's no point anymore, right?
Yes.
So what I think about AI is, I'm excited about everything, right? And I have to say, I'm comfortable with a techno future. I think that we need to build in a changed understanding of what someone's role is in society, and I think you can't unpack the rise of AI from the future of work, from universal basic income to, there's a whole bunch of things here that are all interconnected, right?
Right.
But what what interests me about AI is just the ability for it to be, so transformatively disruptive. I read this wonderful paper recently. Not wonderful if you're a chemist, but it was looking at some AI had managed to do a vast number of chemical synthesis problems in a time period of like less than 24 hours or something, which would have taken chemists at the normal rate hundreds of years to kind of solve these problems. And so not a bright future for that. But just so, I find the power of it almost kind of intoxicating, when I think about, but then I have to drag myself back and think about the societal implications, think about what is going to happen to people's jobs and how are we going to avoid, this sort of the turmoil that could really result from that, or the turmoil that's going to result from the paranoia about it, which to me is equally something that I kind of worry about, right? How that contributes to political polarization and senses of disenfranchisement, those kinds of things. What I think we need to be doing in higher ed around AI is really, as advocates, we need to be focusing on the things that the AIs can't do, right? I'm assuming that they're not going to be able to bring values, spirituality, ethic. There's going to be some things that are part of the human condition that I'm thinking that they may be able to mimic, but they're unlikely to be able to really bring. We obviously need to start training people to program AIs so that, that those kind of, really rich set of jobs that are out there are available to our young people here in Hawaii. And then reskilling and upskilling. So if the world of work is going to change, if we're already, moving in that way, what can we do for Hawaii's workforce who are already in jobs? I saw an interview with an Australian plumber a few years ago where he said, what am I supposed to do? Learn how to fix iPads? And so those kinds of questions, like, okay, well, we can get in front of some of that, and we don't, if we resource it, we don't necessarily have to, wake up in 10, 20 years time and wonder where all the jobs went and look at all of the social costs of that and be horrified. I think there is a way to get in front and have, broad-based upskilling, reskilling for jobs of the future here in Hawaii and in everywhere else, right? But that's going to take quite the effort to get that off the ground, right?
So I'm gonna cheat here and insert a related question. So this is not question number 9. So a machine, and this is riffing off of something you just mentioned a minute ago about chemistry. A machine at Stanford University can draw on a database of 130,000 cases to tell whether a freckle on my face is cancerous. So my question is, what's your reaction to this, and how should parents of prospective college students react to this? Because it says something about what the world of work is going to be and what you might be doing your higher education for.
Right, and I think recently in breast cancer pathology, the AI was found to outperform pathologists.
Radiology,
and I think there are many examples of this. See, my reaction to that as a scientist is excitement. My reaction to it as a person and a prospective patient and someone who has family members that they want to be well, is well, thank God, right? For that we're going to live in an age where medicine is enabled by that level of technology. What I think the parents, I think if their reaction to it is, well, how does my son, daughter, how do they get a piece of this? How do they that kind of excitement of right? Okay, well, if this is, but I think if the response to it is backward looking and says, these jobs are going to disappear, then I feel that's not the way I would wish that the families kind of would respond. And it's certainly, I think, not necessarily a charge to say when I first came to Chaminade, most of the classes I went into in biology, most of the kids would say, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm sure up the hill many were saying, I want to be a lawyer, because that was really all they knew that you could do with a science degree, right? And so I think it's really, and it's a valuable thing to do with a science degree. But I worry a little bit about, what if now we sort of swing the pendulum too far the other way, and we say, okay, well, if you're not in AI and you're not, getting a Google internship, what value are you?
Right.
And, our society here in Hawaii needs people who are going to work in the nonprofits and, measure the rainfall and work in the health clinics. And, there's so much more to science than just this. So I worry a little bit about it becoming kind of a trend-based thing where everyone jumps on it as a bandwagon. But I think not acknowledging that this is the future is a concern, right?
I'm super encouraged that in our public schools here in Hawaii, I'm seeing evidence of academy models, elementary, middle, and high school, most especially in high school. But I've seen already a couple of spectacular examples in elementary school. And what excites me about that is that it means that kids, they're not going to just think, well, I'm going to be a doctor and then wait till higher education and then become a doctor. They're actually going to be thinking about these things and maybe addressing this very question that we're talking about right now right away. Like, let's start in elementary school. And it seems important that they be immersed in the ways of the world and how the world is changing, and that we not wait.
Right. And maybe when they're in middle or high school, they develop a healthcare app or something, right? And maybe what that means is that they become a healthcare entrepreneur instead of a doctor, or maybe what they become is someone who is interested in health disparity, and so they become a politician instead, right? To be an advocate. So I think part of this is really about when parents sort of say to me, well, that's all very well, but what job are they going to get? And I respect that question. I honor it. I try to give the best answer I can. And there's this little part of me inside that every time I get asked that question, I want to say anything they want, right? Which may be trite, but there are, we can't imagine the world of work that these young people are going to walk into. And there are many legitimate answers that were not the answers we would have had to that question, right? It's totally likely that these students will set up their own businesses, that they might run more than one, that they want to be part of the gig economy, that they may want to participate even in as sort of traditional discipline as healthcare. They can engage in that as an entrepreneur, as a data analyst, as someone who does gig work. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of these sort of more structured roles. And, really hard for us to be comfortable with it. Really, really hard for parents to be comfortable with that, right? Because it's just not the way, it's just new, right? New and different, right? So.
Okay, so question number 9. I just finished reading Paul Tough, spelled Tough, Tough. Paul Tough's book titled, or actually it's subtitled, How College Makes or Breaks Us. It's a recent book. And Tough explains, he does a number of things in this book, but one of the things that he does is he explains how college admissions has become like a collective American madness. Unlike when I applied to the University of Oregon in 1979, which was $35 and a really simple application, no essays or anything. Today, college admissions is contributing to extraordinary levels of anxiety in young people and their parents. So the question for you is, what's your take on all this, and where will the solutions come from?
I don't think college should break anybody, and I reject utterly the idea that that it should be some sink or swim rites of passage thing. We collaborate with a group from an R1 university on the mainland, a very prestigious R1 university on the mainland, who proudly told us that in their institution, half the students don't make it through the first semester. And I'm like, and they were talking about this one particular chemistry professor in this R1 mainland school, who was sort of like, the first lesson they gave, they said, half of you will make it through this class. I'm like, I'd fire that guy.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
so I think this idea of the kind of sink or swim mentality and almost kind of like a false elitism is really what we react against. I say we, I mean, my colleagues, Chaminade, but the people I work with in this kind of network of people who are interested in inclusion in STEM, for example, it's really, to me, much more about uncovering potential. And what we have discovered and can prove with data at Chaminade is that our students can stack up against anybody, and they can take their place in graduate school in Stanford or Vanderbilt or all these wonderful places they go. They didn't start from much, and they may not have got a look in if they'd applied to those colleges from day one.
Yeah, right.
But with the appropriate development, they obviously can take their place wherever they want to be. So I completely reject this idea that, that there's only one way to do this, and it's this sort of relentless race to the top and clawing your way, and that it's based on, perhaps, outdated in some cases ideas of what is prestige. I think college admissions should be about fit and not necessarily and outcomes, So I think parents should ask the question, is this a good college? And drill down. What are the outcomes? And what are the outcomes for students who are like my son, daughter, right? Not just what are the outcomes, in the aggregate. So asking those kind of hard questions, the parents should talk to those admission counselors about, well, give me an example of a student like mine who came from a place like this, with our kind of leveling, tell us about that. But the other piece of it is really about fit, right? And a sense of belonging at a particular campus. Like I said, the secret sauce is not necessarily, always what's revealed or supposed to be captured by a high school GPA or an SAT test that someone sat in a room under immense pressure and did for an hour.
Right.
I think that whether a student is successful at a college is probably more to do with, is it the right college for them? And are the professors there going to give them the right kind of support? When I was an undergraduate, the support I needed was constantly being engaged and interested. And I happened to find a place, a small university in the north of England, where there were professors who would, put little problems up for you to solve. Like, I always remember there was one that was on the board one day, how many protons are there in a bar of chocolate? Completely unanswerable question, but it makes you think, right? And I needed that. I didn't so much need the pastoral care. I pretty soon got bored of going to the sort of pastoral care sessions every week and talking about stuff. But it was there if I'd needed it. Now, what I see, with some of our students, they kind of distribute everywhere from what I needed in college to really, and being, when they come in, being very gritty, very, very resilient, kind of ready to go. And then a lot of students who need a lot of support to navigate those first sort of few critical years. And so I think a lot of parents choose colleges on the idea of what the student's going to be or get or have when they get done.
Right.
But it's actually what the road that gets them there, which is the thing that should be the selection process. In my opinion, it's, are these professors going to support your student? Does the college have enough systems in place that if they're struggling, that's going to be noticed and it's going to be intervened, it's going to be honored, and they're going to be helped, right? So, because I just feel that, that's that real, like you said, that kind of relentless focus on clawing your way into a prestigious college. I don't know. I certainly think it's not right for a lot of our students here in Hawaii. I think it's, I'm all for these wonderful educational experiences they can get, but I think there's also, where do you fit? Where do you belong?
Right.
Where are you going to be honored, for what you do, and not sink or swim?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a question that's very personal for me because over those 17 years that I taught at the high school level, of course, I wrote what must be thousands of letters of rec for colleges, and I encouraged kids to, apply and aim high. And now today I'm feeling a little bit regretful about some of that, and that maybe I was contributing to the madness in certain ways. But I love the idea of fit, and what fit requires is that the parents are drilling down in a different way, that they're not drilling down for prestige so much as what exactly happens on this campus that would work well with my son or daughter's personality and the way that they learn and their growth mindset or their closed mindset, whatever it is. And I think if we get closer to that, then
yeah, and some definitions of return on investment that are broader, I think, than what is the absolute amount of money that this college costs versus this college, and what scholarships are they offering me. I mean, I think that our students in Hawaii are greatly in demand from mainland colleges that are seeing enrollment drops or that maybe don't have the diversity that they would like to have. And I think, there's great packages out there for students, and some of that's, wonderful. They're going to do just great. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I think, there also is, as I said earlier, putting that geographical distance with Hawaii will also put a lot of young people who have been raised in close family, close to community, close to church, close to, their clubs, their hula, whatever. It puts a different kind of distance. It's a cultural distance and a distance that sort of, pulls very narrow, that kind of thread of support and connectedness to their support systems. So I think all of that has to be factored in. And, I think that this idea of return on investment, free college, affordable college, very important debates to have. I think a lot of education is vastly overpriced in the US. The challenge, though, is when that becomes the only way that you make a decision. It stops people drilling down past that, price point. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so question number 10.
We're in the home straight.
We're in the home stretch here, yes. Okay. So I recently read an extraordinary document titled Uncharted Territory, which came out of Stanford University's Institute for Design, or Institute of Design, known as the D School. It's a guide for reimagining higher education up to the year 2025. And one idea that was in this report is what I'm calling looping. It's not their term, but I'm calling it looping, where, for example, an individual might purchase 6 years of college or university with the opportunity to redeem the purchase over a lifetime. So I'm just super struck by this idea. And again, for me, it's a little bit personal because I did my college a while back, but I was also an older college student. Like I started right out of high school, and that was a complete waste of a year in college. And then I became a chef, and I became a hotel manager, and then I went back and got my undergrad. And then I was a seriously motivated student in my 30s with a lot of business experience under my belt. So it feels like I wish I had the chance to do it over again and to do it in a looping way. So the question around this is, what are your thoughts about breaking up of a traditional 2-year, 4-year model of higher education and disruptions that are like that?
Like I said, I get excited about everything. What excites me about that is this sort of idea. So first of all, I think that life happens to students, right? And I think the way, a professor might just record an absence. You get several absences and you drop the course, right? But then that course isn't offered again that year, so you're down a year, and then you don't come back, right? And so I would be fascinated to know, how much, wastage and dropout in the system is really related to this sort of, life events that the system doesn't necessarily pick up and doesn't necessarily honor or respect. It's just, the student flaked in my class.
Right.
I mean, I spoke to a student recently who, been told that they'd flaked in a class and, had a dad who died of a horrible infection and was their only caregiver. But that no one saw that, right? So what excites me about that idea, that looping, is partly that students to whom life happens, and it's an acknowledgement that our students are not often now, like I was when I went 18, ready for 4 years of college, my whole life ahead of me, right? They're typically more non-traditional students who have different pressures in their lives and different things going on. In an aging society, more are being called on to work as caregivers in addition, and given the economic situation in Hawaii, they are working multiple jobs to put themselves through college, right? So, which has effects on performance as it's conventionally measured. So I think that this idea of looping, if it's a way that the system can flex to accommodate the sort of greater arc of life that's happening to these students,
Right.
that would make me optimistic. The second thing that makes me optimistic about it is the idea that I think you need to learn different things at different times in your life.
Yeah.
I think everything has a season, and
These
I
are
think
like
that
springboards in effect.
yeah, and I think that if young people come in, at 18, 19, and what we give them is, I hate the term, soft skills, right? How to be in a team, how to show up, how to, work with those kind of things that employers want, right? How to navigate those sort of life skill aspects of being in a workplace, and then, and help them discern what they're interested in. And then they go out and then they come back and they've discerned and they're interested and they're motivated, and then we specialize. I kind of like that idea, I have to say, because it would let you do an almost kind of just in time, type of education. What do you need to know when you're 19?
Right.
Well, how has that then changed by the time you're 25 or 35 or with a certain, set of life experiences under your belt? So I get excited about that. What I get less excited about is this a pyramid scheme type thing where a lot of people, particularly students who are not privileged, who are lower income, end up buying plans that they never use, and it's
Sure.
a ripoff, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you look at what the for-profit sector has done, it has disproportionately disadvantaged low income, first generation students, right? By saddling them with, large amounts of financial burden, incredibly long times to degree completion, incredibly low degree completion rates. So, if Chaminade's doing it or Stanford's doing it, I would be optimistic. But if it gets into the hands of the for-profit sector,
right? Yeah.
Well, not all of the for-profit sector, but I think if it gets into the hands of the sort of the darker underbelly of higher education, it would worry me that who's going to be exploited by that.
Right.
It's not going to be the 18-year-old who can afford 4 years at Harvard.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's and a BMW. It's not that student.
Right.
Right. So how do we make that fair? That
Right.
challenge. It's
Right.
a challenge to think about that.
I think about it in terms of my own life as a teacher, a history teacher. Had I had a package like that, for example, if it had been a Stanford package, or even if it was a blended package, if universities were willing to cooperate with each other so that those credits could cross-hatch, there would have been a moment, for example, when I would have wanted to be at Stanford to take Sam Weinberg's course on teaching with the primary sources, which was something that I came across late in my teaching career. But even then, at that point, it could have been a springboard for me to take my teaching in a slightly different direction, according to what I might have learned from him. So I'm excited by that idea, and I will be excited. I will continue to be excited about how higher ed will respond to these kinds of ideas.
Right. And then how do you incorporate into that sort of model those kind of meta outcomes where I was saying, higher ed is greater than the sum of its parts, right? How do you incorporate that into that? The hallway conversation with the professor, or the one amazing guest speaker that came that week. There's so much more. There's just a lot of questions that I have about how that would actually work,
Right.
and not morph into something that's more, again, sort of, purely you did this list of courses and you got a competency, right?
Yeah.
I do really like this new trend, though, towards tailored degrees, individualized degree pathways, and letting the student direct some of their learning. I like that a lot, and this has that element to it, which I really like. So.
I've talked to Matt Lynch, who's the coordinator for sustainability programs across the University of Hawaii systems. And what he's doing is helping kids to actually do that kind of crafting where there isn't specifically a sustainability degree.
Right.
And that's super exciting that you would find your places where you get what you need to get. And then
and it's like data science. That's because sustainability is so many different things to different people.
Right.
And it's such a broad, area. And you can be a sustainability in focused political science major or a climate change scientist or a public health person or, so much.
Literature,
right?
Whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Media, film, right? These are, that's a great trend, I think, in higher ed.
Right. So, Helen, if you're game for this, I want to cheat here and tack on a bonus question at the end. So this one actually comes to me from a colleague of yours, Mark Hines, who's an adjunct professor, I believe, at Shaman, and has been for a long time. Mark is also the director of the MPX program at Mid-Pacific Institute. And for me, he's just Yoda personified when it comes to deeper learning. So David Epstein has written a book titled Range that argues, and Mark just finished this book, and I'm also working my way through it as well, that argues generalists, quote unquote, triumph, that's his word, in a specialized world. So the question is, if, and that's a big if, the evidence supports Mr. Epstein, surely colleges and universities are the chief culprit in making the last 150 years the age of narrow specialization. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's a paper by a guy called Thomas Cech, who's a very famous and highly regarded biomedical scientist. And he wrote a paper for the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which in turn is a huge research organization that also funds a lot of work in STEM education in the US. We have a grant from them, actually. And so what he did is he looked not at the statistics of how many people get science degrees, not at the statistics of how many people get PhDs or anything like that. He looked at who's actually getting the grants, like who are the scientists who win the race and get the sufficient funding, like an NIH R01, these very prestigious grant mechanisms, and are actually getting to kind of frame the debate, right, and move science. And what he found was that scientists educated in small liberal arts institutions were greatly overrepresented in that group, right? And I think I know exactly why that is because, when I came up in science, I decided at 18 I was going to do biochemistry. I did a British degree that was biology and chemistry, some maths and physics. I didn't get to study philosophy. I'm, daunted by how well read all of you are because, I didn't, I kind of didn't get that memo that there's this sort of, this kind of roundedness to science. And I didn't get to study really anything, literature, any kind of general ed. That's just not the system, right? And so I think, these what we call general education cores are incredibly important and need to be protected in American higher education because they're really probably what was making those scientists the successful ones, the ones who really got to have the resources to make the discoveries. Right. It's not just intellect, they're all smart people, but it's about being able to bring the values, a certain amount of determination, that sense of mission probably to why they were doing the science. They probably learned in their general education how to communicate, right, which nobody ever really taught me, right? These wonderful skill sets, and that's a real jewel in the crown of American higher ed that probably is, a secret sauce that makes, that statement, valid, right? That really it's like in Japan, right? It's the space between the rocks. Right, in this kind of Zen idea of like what really moves a student towards that place of being filled with purpose, successful in what they do. I mean, I think that is probably more what's in between the curriculum than it is in the specialization. Right. I think I've had a lot of students come through my lab as graduate students for their PhD or through their master's degree. And it's rarely the 4.0s that kind of, quote, by my standards, make it, publish papers, give great talks, have their own ideas and all those kinds of things. By my metrics of success, it's usually the ones who have a great sense of purpose in what they're doing, can roll with the rejections and the continuous kind of, roller coaster that is sort of doing science, but also that, have some breadth to their personality and where they see themselves in the world, right?
And a larger worldview.
Yeah, the broader worldview. So my feeling is that, I think that's probably very true, and that balance between specialization and expertise, and when you gain it in your life, is something that to me is kind of TBD. It goes back to that idea of the looping, right? If I can teach you all the biology out of the textbook when you're 19, but until you apply it to something, it's just facts that you either use to pass the exam or fail the exam, right?
Right.
Whereas I really feel that, unless you use it, all of that specialization may not even actually be what we think it is in terms of the students' learning and their outcomes. Are they really getting this, or did they just retain it long enough to pass the test, right? So, yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting area.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So we have come to the end of our time together. So listeners, we have been listening to Dr. Helen Turner, who is the Vice President for Strategy and Innovation at Chaminade University. It's been a real privilege talking to you today. Thank you for both parts of this podcast, and at some point we'll have you on again.
Thanks, Josh.